Growing up in the 2010s, you were treated like a pariah for liking anime. The medium had a very negative reputation around it. If you watched anime, you were labeled as a weeaboo and would be bullied relentlessly. I saw this a lot in middle school, and as a result, I never got into anime. I tried it. I really did. I tried watching Attack on Titan, but I stopped after a few episodes. Something about it just didn't click with me. I thought the art style was lame, and I wrote the entire medium off as cringe. I've always loved kaiju flicks, especially Godzilla. I distinctly remember when Shin Godzilla was released in American cinemas in 2016, and I kept hearing about something called Evangelion, and how one of the directors for Shin Godzilla was the mind behind that show. Upon doing some research, I realized Evangelion was an anime, and I never really investigated further. After all, anime is cringe, right? Fast forward to 2020, during the lockdowns, I had a ton of time on my hands, and I binge-watched a ton of shows that I hadn't really seen before, like Community and Star Trek The Next Generation. But I kept seeing Neon Genesis Evangelion pop up in my Netflix feed, so I finally gave in and watched the first episode. It's safe to say that I was absolutely blown away, and I proceeded to binge-watch the entire series. At first, I was hooked by the kaiju action, but stayed for the extremely personal and emotional storytelling of Hideki Anno. It was just what I needed at the time, being extremely isolated from all of my friends and loved ones in the midst of COVID. I was honestly angry. This was what an anime could be? Is this what I was missing out on? I've always wanted to make a video about Neon Genesis Evangelion, but it had to be in-depth and not just a surface-level overview of the series. So, that's exactly what you're watching right now. This is my in-depth retrospective on one of my all-time favorite TV shows. Specifically, I'll be going over the original 26 episodes as well as Death and Rebirth and the End of Evangelion. I'll save the later entries in the franchise for a future video if the demand is there for it, but it's a bit hard making a retrospective on something that is still somewhat ongoing, with the most recent film in the franchise being released in 2021. But first, what is a Neon Genesis Evangelion? It's hard to describe the plot vaguely without the risk of sounding reductive, but to get a general idea of the show, it's part of the apocalyptic mecha genre, which is a genre of Japanese animation that focuses on the use of giant fighter robots, typically to avoid a type of apocalyptic scenario. We follow a young teenage boy who is called to a military base at the request of his father to be the pilot of one of these robots. This show drew its inspiration from Western religious iconography to give it a visual edge over its competitors. This series is also notable for its introspective nature, taking a deep look at the inner psyche of human beings and the desires of the heart. If you haven't watched the show or movies, I'd highly recommend doing that before interacting with this video. Partially to experience the story the way it was meant to be experienced, but also partially because it's hard to describe some of the introspective scenes in the show if you haven't seen them for yourself. A lot of these scenes are very conceptual, and after having experienced them yourself, they tend to take on a greater meaning than just what's being discussed. A note for potential first-time viewers of the show, by the way. If you are sensitive to flashing lights, this might not be the best show or video for you to watch, as the implementation of flashing screens and imagery is used heavily throughout the show. In this video, I will try to cut it down to an absolute minimum. However, it is relied upon to the point that Hideki Anno voiced his complaints after the Pokemon seizure incident, causing more restrictions to be placed on flashing imagery in shows. So I did my best to cut it down for this video, but there are still some flashing screens here and there. There's a fan-made spreadsheet detailing these sequences in the TV show that you can find online, but obviously moving forward with extreme caution is advisable. Now, really quick, a notice before moving forward. We'll discuss this a bit more in depth after the summary of the show and movies, but it's worth noting that I am working off of the Netflix version, which has garnered some controversy when Netflix paid for the licensing rights to the show because they changed quite a bit of it. Specifically, they went with a more direct translation of the original Japanese when doing the English translation, which leaves the original versions with some different dialogue here and there. Fans of the original show might notice some distinct differences references or changes in subtext, so I thought I'd note right now that I am working off the Netflix version of Evangelion. I will also be adding in explanations for terms as their relevance is brought up because the creators have admitted to leaving their explanations for later on in the show to keep some mystery about Seal and NERV's actions. Some of these explanations will be provided before they're brought up in the show, just for the sake of clarity. I'll be sourcing these explanations from the glossary included in the pamphlet sold at the cinema release of the End of Evangelion, referred to as the Red Cross Book. And then one last thing I just want to clarify is, I am American.
What the fuck is a kilometer?
In case you could not tell. I bring that up because I am going to be mispronouncing some names or terms or phrases here and there. That doesn't mean I'm not going to try my best to get everything right, but cut me a little bit of slack here. A ton of research went into this video, but I struggle with some of these names. I honestly do. I'm sorry. Anyways, this is Neon Genesis Evangelion. We start out the series during the middle of the first Angel attack in 15 years since the second impact. 14-year-old Shinji Ikari has just arrived in Tokyo 3. Unable to get a hold of his ride, he begins walking into the city when he spots the angel, Sachiel. Suddenly, a woman, Misato Katsuragi, pulls up in a vehicle to drive Shinji to headquarters. The Japanese government authorizes the use of a bomb in an attempt to destroy the attacking angel, which is unsuccessful but buys them a short amount of time as the angel regenerates. After flipping the car that was blown off the road as a result of the bomb detonation, Misato and Shinji begin to make their way to NERV headquarters, and control over the angel situation is granted to Commander Gendo Ikari, Supreme Commander of NERV. Upon arrival, Shinji is led through NERV headquarters, where we get our first look at the Evangelions, machines built by them to counter the angels and defend humanity. He's then brought to his father, Commander Ikari, and told the reason he was summoned was to be a pilot for the Eva 1. Shinji rejects this request, lacking the confidence to work one of those things, let alone fight in it. The angel begins to reactivate, and Misato tries to convince him, knowing that they are running out of time. He continues to reject the idea of piloting the Eva, so they fetch the other pilot, Rei Ayanami. She's brought out on a stretcher with severe injuries and is knocked to the ground following an attack made by the angel. Shinji then decides that he will pilot the Eva after seeing her condition. Another blast causes debris to fall. Despite Unit 1 not even being activated yet, it shields Shinji from the falling debris. Shinji gets into Unit 1 and launches into the battlefield. The angel attacks, breaking his arm and then causing a cranial hemorrhage to the Evangelion, of which Shinji can feel everything due to the neural connection required to pilot the unit. As a result, he blacks out. This episode opens with Shinji in a hospital room before it quickly cuts to the next scene. We're introduced to the group SEAL, a council that is controlling the information surrounding and related to angels, NERV, and the Human Instrumentality Project, which is said to be the final destination for humanity. They have control over various organizations, including the United Nations, and direct control over Commander Gendo Ikari. SEAL's intentions and identities remain a mystery for a majority of the series, basically until the final moments. They've already begun to create a false narrative around the true nature of the angels and their plan for humanity. Commander Ikari is under brutal scrutiny for the way the previous angel was defeated, destroying half the city and sending out an amateur to fight an angel. He argues that they still defeated the angel, buying him some time to train the new pilot. It's revealed that the Ikaris have never really lived together. Their relationship with each other is incredibly strained. Misato finds out that Shinji is living alone. He prefers it that way, but she decides that he will live with her instead. We're then gifted with a breathtaking scene of Tokyo 3 being risen from underground, a city built to protect from and defeat the angels. They head to Misato's place, which is a total mess, and Shinji gets settled for the night. While in bed, he remembers the battle. The Evangelion had become inoperable, but suddenly the unit reactivated and went berserk, which is a term that's constantly referenced when an Eva unit begins behaving counter to the pilot and NERV's commands. Ikari remarked that they'd won the battle before the Eva even defeated the angel. Unit 1 sprung to life and rushed the Angel, viciously attacking it until it wraps itself around Unit 1's head and self-destructs into a massive cross-shaped explosion. The battle was won. We begin with Eva pilot testing, with Shinji learning how to shoot in the Eva and some general information on the usage of the Evangelions. The Evangelions are man's first and only real defense against the beings known as angels due to their ability to neutralize the AT field generated by an angel so they can then attack. The pilots need to have a certain percentage of synchronization for them to be able to control and pilot the unit, which they operate via neurological link. So the pilot's mind must be in good condition, and any damage inflicted to the Eva can be felt by the pilot until the connection is severed or destroyed. The Evas are powered by an umbilical cord, which is basically a big power cable that plugs into their back. If the cable is severed, the pilots have roughly 1 to 5 minutes of power before the Eva becomes inoperable. This is only the case with units 0 through 5, as later units are installed with S2 engines, which removes the necessity for the umbilical cords. Shinji transfers into his new school, where people quickly find out he's the new Eva pilot, and he's swarmed with questions. We get to meet Kensuke, a boy obsessed with military and NERV operations, and Toji, whose sister was in the hospital following the previous Angel attack. We also get a brief look at the cover-up of the second impact being taught in school, that a meteor struck Antarctica, causing massive loss of life. After school, Toji tracks down Shinji and punches him in the face, once for his sister and twice for saying he didn't even want to pilot the Eva to begin with. Rei finds Shinji to bring him into NERV headquarters because another angel, Shemshell, has been spotted. Unit 1 is launched to attack the Angel, but he shoots too quickly and obscures his vision, which leads to him being hit repeatedly and his power cable being severed. Meanwhile, Kensuke convinces Toji to leave the shelter so they can watch the Angel fight, by guilt-tripping him for punching Shinji twice. They sneak up to a hill only to see Unit 1 being attacked. The Angel launches Unit 1 across the city, landing on the hill Toji and Kensuke were standing on, and almost crushes them. The Angel begins to attack again, but Shinji can't fight back without risking his classmates' lives. Misato orders him to let them on board and then withdraw to HQ. He lets them into the cockpit, but then attacks the Angel with his knife, and just barely defeats it before running out of power. After that, Shinji stops showing up for school. After 4 days, Misato finally realizes that Shinji has disappeared, and that's why he's been absent from school. His classmates show up looking for him. She lies, telling them he's been at headquarters. When she closes the door, she can't contain her frustration. We get to see Shinji ride the Tokyo 3 train loop until the final stop of the day. He wanders the city sleeping on benches and eventually making it to the fields outside of town. He continues to wander until he finds Kensuke playing soldier in the woods. Kensuke reveals he doesn't have a mother either, and Shinji spends the night in his tent before being found by NERV security in the morning. Shinji is taken back to NERV HQ where he decides he never wants to pilot the Evas again, and wants to leave. While being escorted to the train station by NERV security, they find Kensuke and Toji waiting for them. Toji expresses regret after seeing what battle is really like, and demands to be hit. After they part ways, Shinji runs back to confess that he's a coward and a liar and he deserves to be hit. After waiting for the train, Shinji decides not to leave, only to find Misato waiting for him. We end the episode with the revelation that the search for the 4th children has begun. We get a glimpse of a past reactivation test of Unit 0. When the Eva went berserk and began attacking the wall, Gendo Ikari stood behind. Rei's pod was launched from the Eva into the testing chamber and was ripped open while it was burning hot by Ikari to save her life. The malfunction was attributed to an unstable mental state, which is already obviously unusual for her character. We find some critical information on the Angels from Dr. Ritsuko Akagi, the head developer of the Evas and the lead of the technology department. Angels are alien life forms that originate from the first angel, Adam, that continue to invade Earth and are made similarly to light, made from waves and particles. They also share a 99.98% DNA match with humans, which will become very important later on. Ritsuko sends Shinji to Rei's apartment to drop off her new ID badge. The apartment is sparse and incredibly industrial, which is off-putting to Shinji initially. He lets himself in and fiddles with a pair of glasses that look like Commander Ikari's, when she catches him after coming out of the shower. She gets dressed and leaves while Shinji mutters excuses and makes it all the way to HQ before realizing that her ID badge doesn't work. She snatches the new badge from Shinji and walks off again. They make their way to a reactivation test. Rei confronts Shinji about his feelings towards his father on the way there. He states that he hates his father and sees him as a bad person, which gets him slapped. The reactivation test is suddenly postponed due to the arrival of the fifth angel, Ramiel. Unit 1 is launched, almost immediately fired upon by the angel, and begins to melt. Shinji is rushed to emergency care to recover quickly, while a plan is formed to attack the angel, now drilling into HQ. They decide that the target can only be hit at long range, so they sequester a prototype gun from the UN and authorize a countrywide blackout to draw enough power to use the weapon against the angel. Rei meets Shinji at the hospital, where she gives him the schedule for the operation and dinner. He rejects the dinner and rejects piloting the Eva, so Rei says they'll reconfigure it to her before walking off. He decides to pilot Unit 1 and goes to the mission site. Unit 1 is to shoot the angel because their sync rates are higher. Unit 0 is to shield the target. Shinji contemplates that they could die while they change. Rei says he won't die because she'll defend him, then bids him farewell. Unit 1 fires and misses, causing them to be fired upon. Unit 0 defends with the shield while the gun recharges, but begins to suffer heavy damages. Unit 1 fires and strikes the angel, defeating it. The escape pods are ejected, and Shinji rushes to Rei's pod, ripping open the burning hatch to find Rei alive. He scolds her for her carelessness with her life, despite the obvious irony. Misato goes to Old Tokyo for a demonstration of a new pilotless Eva developed by the US, accompanied by Ritsuko, who questions the ethics and safety of an Evangelion without a pilot. These are met with criticisms of NERV's carelessness with the UN's budget and some blatant 1990s sexism. During the activation test, the new Eva goes rogue and stops responding to commands. After some debating and calls to higher officials responsible for the unit, Misato finally demands to take control over the situation, coming up with a plan to bring in Unit 1 and get on board the other Eva to shut it down before it destroys the city in its path. The representative gives her the manual shutdown code, and Unit 1 is launched, carrying Misato to the target. After boarding the rogue Eva, Misato discovers that this is not a malfunction, but rather a sabotage when the passcode is rejected. She begins attempting to manually push the pins into place to shut down the Eva, when the unit suddenly deactivated on its own. Ritsuko muses that the scenario went well, despite Misato's unanticipated involvement alluding to the fact that she was aware there would be a major malfunction. It's later revealed that this was another one of Seal's interventions. Misato, Shinji, Toji, and Kensuke are all on a UN ship that is part of a fleet escorting Evangelion Unit 2, as well as the second children, Asuka, Langley, Soryu, and her handler, Ryoji Kaji. Asuka and Shinji are not impressed with each other, while Kensuke and Toji are there mostly for comedic relief. Out of nowhere, an angel attacks from under the ocean. Asuka decides to fight the angel by activating Unit 2 and convinces Shinji to get on board with her. After floundering for a bit and struggling to pilot Unit 2 with two minds in the cockpit, Unit 2 is knocked off the boats it uses as platforms and briefly swallowed by the angel. Managing to force their way out, they eventually develop a plan to pry open the angel's mouth and fire a missile down its throat. During the battle, Kaji flees via helicopter to secretly deliver the embryo of Adam to Commander Ikari, which is likely what drew the angel to the ship to begin with. From this time forward, Commander Ikari can be seen wearing a glove over one hand that is later revealed to contain the embryo of Adam, making him Adam's physical embodiment. This is one of the first instances we see of Gendo actively betraying Seal. Episode 9, titled Both of You Dance Like You Want to Win, is one of my all-time favorite episodes in the entire series. So let's get right into it. Asuka, or Asuka depending on your pronunciation, I'll just be saying Asuka because I'm Wisconsin trash, begins her first day at school in Tokyo, as well as meeting Rei and moving into Misato's apartment. The next angel, Israfel, strikes the city. Unit 1 and 2 are launched to fight the angel, but Asuka, being eager to prove her excellence, rushes the target and slices it in half. This is one of the very first examples of her competitive nature in the show and her tendency to rush into situations without really thinking them through. The Angel then divides itself into two separate entities and disables both Evas. Control over the situation is then transferred to the UN, who deploy these mines that give them roughly 1 week before the Angel is operational again. These are incredibly powerful weapons that the UN possesses. While they're not powerful enough to kill an Angel on their own, due to the presence of AT fields, they often do cause enough damage to temporarily disable an Angel. Shinji and Asuka are lectured about responsibility, and a plan is formulated for an attack that needs to be perfectly in sync. They begin a week-long mirroring exercise and learn the choreography for the battle that is to come. Asuka doesn't open up to the experience until Misato threatens to replace her with Rei. Eventually, the two are able to sync and practice the footwork. The attack takes place, set to music, and every movement is perfect. The Angel is defeated, but they do not stick the landing, causing both Evas to crash. This synchronized dance scene is one of the most visually captivating moments in the entire series. The fluidity of the fighting, as well as the perfect timing to the music, really lends this scene an interesting look. Asuka's hopes to attend a school trip are quickly dashed. They aren't allowed to leave in case of an emergency, and they have failing grades. Asuka learns that she doesn't struggle with the concepts, but she's not very good at kanji yet, which is what causes her grades to fall, and she decides to slack off instead. The teams at NERV have located an Angel in an embryonic state, buried within an active volcano. When the target is officially identified to be of Angel DNA, Unit 2 is called to action so that they can retrieve the embryo. The intention is to capture the Angel alive while preserved in an embryonic state to further understand the life cycles and evolution of the Angels. Unit 2 is equipped with a heat-resistant suit, and so is the pilot, much to the dismay of Asuka, because she feels as if the suit makes her and Unit 2 look fat and ridiculous. The goal of the mission is to capture the Angel alive, but she is to attack if it begins to activate. They quickly discover that the embryo is much further into the crust than NERV predicted, forcing descent far past the safety thresholds to even access the Angel. The embryo is contained for a moment but begins to rapidly activate and attack Unit 2. Asuka attempts to fight the Angel, but she had lost her knife during the descent to the Angel, and the cables securing her suit are beginning to fail. Unit 1 sends down a spare knife, with which she severs a coolant valve and shoves it into the mouth of the Angel, then stabs the Angel, resulting in defeat due to the severe pressure difference between the coolant and the magma. Unit 2 begins ascent, but her ascension cable is severed, causing her to begin sinking into the magma. Out of nowhere, Unit 1 drops in to come save her from falling down into the depths of the volcano. During testing of Unit 0, power is suddenly lost in the facility. Ritsuko and Ikari meet about potential sabotage of HQ. During this time, Misato and Kaji are trapped in an elevator, where we get to see a bit more of their previous relationship and drama play out. Finally, our three pilots arrive at the facility only to find that the machines won't scan their ID cards. They make their way into the back tunnels and emergency routes in the building as attempts to contact anyone inside headquarters has failed. An Angel is spotted by the UN, but attempts to contact NERV are unsuccessful due to the power at HQ being lost. Eventually, NERV is notified of the impending Angel, but it's already made its way above HQ and begins secreting acid that's melting a hole into the geofront. They manually prepare the Evas for launch and wait for the pilots to arrive. The pilots stumble upon the Angel while attempting to navigate the tunnels and quickly make their way towards the Evangelion's launch bay, where they're met with the rest of staff waiting for them. The Evas are launched and locate the Angel, which drips acid onto them, making them drop their weapons. Asuka devises a plan. Unit 2 is to defend while Unit 0 is to retrieve the gun and bring it to Unit 1 so he can shoot the Angel. The mission goes smoothly and they defeat the Angel. Power is restored to HQ. Episode 12, She Said, Don't Make Others Suffer for Your Personal Hatred, starts with a flashback to the second impact, where Misato's father carries her body and places it in an escape pod, making her the sole survivor of the Katsuragi expedition. This is the first brief look we get at the actual events of the second impact, outside of the cover-up being taught to the public that it was caused by a massive meteor hitting Antarctica. We then switch to harmonics testing, with Shinji's sync rates continuing to climb. Ritsuko notes that it's like he was born to pilot the Eva, Misato is then promoted from captain to major, so they threw a party for her. Asuka, Shinji, Kaji, Ritsuko, and the class representative, Hikari, attend the celebration. Meanwhile, Commander Ikari and Deputy Commander Kozo Fuyutsuki are in the area formerly known as Antarctica. Fuyutsuki mentions that the LCLC is hell on Earth, while Ikari calls it a pure world, free from sin. Back in Japan, an angel has been spotted over the Pacific, and when attempts to contact Ikari fail, Misato is placed in charge of the mission. An attempt to contain the angel is made and fails. The angel, which has an unusually strong AT field, begins to drop missile-like pieces of itself on Japan that are getting closer to the area of HQ as it descends to the Earth. The AT field, by the way, stands for Absolute Terror Field, and it's a physical barrier that the angels are capable of producing in order to defend themselves. The Evangelions were built with the ability to neutralize the AT fields so that they may attack the angels, but some AT fields require more than one Evangelion to be able to neutralize it effectively. The Evas are launched to hold the angel by its unusually strong AT field, and launch an attack to disable the field and stab the angel. The mission is successful, with Commander Ikari praising Misato for her leadership in his absence, as well as the pilots, specifically Shinji. As the episode ends, Misato treats the crew for ramen. A new autopilot system for the Evas undergoes testing. Pilots are placed into temporary bodies in a testing chamber within NERV, which has suffered significant damage, including a water leak. Corrosion suddenly appears due to an angel manifesting as a nanoswarm with virus-like behavior. The pilots are ejected for safety as the angel evolves rapidly, attacking intelligently and even infiltrating the Magi system. Ritsuko, aided by the Magi systems named after aspects of her mother's personality, manages to slow the angel's progress and initiates a counter-hack through Magus Casper 3. The Magi, designed to mirror human inner turmoil, plays a crucial role in the battle. The reverse hack with the angel comes down to the very last second, but the angel is defeated and the self-destruct proposal is denied. Power over the central dogma is returned safely to the hands of NERV. Seal recaps the previous angel attacks and ensuing battles covering Angels 3 through 10, and reveals their suspicions about the recent incident at NERV. Commander Ikari tries to cover up the Angels' attack and infiltration of the central dogma, but Seal suspects that the 11th Angel was the cause of the incident despite the official story. Rei and Shinji are pilot testing in each other's Evas. We find out that Unit 2 is the only unit Asuka is compatible with, and that's the reason she isn't included for testing. Unit 0 goes berserk during Shinji's test and begins attacking the wall of the testing chamber. After the umbilical cord is severed, it continues to attack the wall, almost caving it in, when the unit finally loses power. Shinji is moved to the hospital for potential psychological contamination, but ends up being just fine. Commander Ikari makes a formal report to the Council that all projects are on time. They begin doubting his loyalty, though, to Seal. Commander Fuyutsuki warns Commander Ikari of threats to his Supreme Commander position and reputation with Seal, questioning his loyalty. Ikari asserts his stance, confident as long as projects progress on schedule. Kaji's role as a covert intelligence officer investigating NERV is unveiled. Asuka and Shinji are left home alone while Misato attends a wedding with Ritsuko and Kaji. After a tense exchange, Misato and Kaji share a kiss, but Misato later returns home drunk and self-loathing. Shinji meets Commander Ikari at Yui Ikari's grave, revealing no body was recovered. Asuka discovers Shinji playing the cello after she returns from a date that she ditched. Misato confronts Kaji at NERV's lower levels, discovering his double agent role and secrets involving Commander Ikari, Ritsuko, and the true identity of Adam, revealed as Lilith, housed in Central Dogma. During harmonics testing, Shinji achieves the highest synchronization rate among the pilots, earning praise from Misato. Asuka vents her frustration in the locker room. Suddenly, an angel appears over Tokyo, prompting Eva deployment. Asuka challenges Shinji to take charge, leading to his attempt to shoot the angel, but he is engulfed by its shadowy trap. With Shinji lost and Eva power depleting, Misato orders a withdrawal. Asuka mocks Shinji, nearly meeting a similar fate herself. Ritsuko theorizes that the angel created a Dirk Sea, an imaginary space connected to another universe, proposing bombs to defeat it. But Misato rejects the plan, protective of Shinji's life. Meanwhile, Shinji undergoes a profound introspection and existential crisis within the angel's grasp. As Unit 1 powers down, Yui's hands briefly touch Shinji's face, triggering its berserk emergence, tearing through the Angel. Shinji wakes to Misato's tears, hospitalized as Rei visits and Asuka listens nearby, marking a very significant shift in the series' tone towards introspection. Misato replaces Shinji before Seal's council after an Angel attack. They question her about potential first contact, the Angel's interest in the human mind, and the psychological risks after losing contact with Unit 1 in the Dirk Sea. Seal notes the Angels are becoming more intelligent, but they aren't yet coordinating. NERV's second branch and Unit 4 vanished during attempts to install an S2 engine, part of testing for mass-produced Evangelions. Unit 3 moves to NERV HQ for safety, and the search for the fourth child begins. The dummy plug system, based on Rei's consciousness, nears completion, upsetting Misato when Toji is chosen as the fourth child without her knowledge. Toji and Shinji visit Rei, who shows rare emotion. Meanwhile, Commanders Ikari and Fuyutsuki debate Tokyo 3's significance, with Ikari disparaging it. Misato runs into Kaji flirting with Maya Ibuki, one of the main technical operators. She confronts him about his intelligence gathering, and he gives her a tip to follow for some information. He then takes Shinji out for tea and shows him his watermelon patch. He encourages Shinji to work on figuring out his sense of purpose before he's called back to HQ for harmonics testing, where his sync rates have dropped. Toji is pulled into the principal's office and told that he's the fourth children. He only agrees on the condition that his sister be moved to NERV headquarters for her care in the hospital, in which he keeps hidden. Asuka accidentally finds out the identity of the fourth children prematurely when attempting to make a move on Kaji at HQ. Unit 3 is inbound from the United States for inspection and pilot testing. Misato and Ritsuko are put in charge of this testing, and the fourth children will be taken to pilot the Eva. Rei figures out that Toji is the new Eva pilot, leaving Shinji as the only one in the dark. The next day, pilot testing for Unit 3 is set to take place, but during the harmonics testing, the unit suddenly goes berserk. It's determined that Unit 3 is infected by an angel, and is therefore reclassified, and the mission shifts to defeating it. Unit 0, 1, and 2 are brought to the site and briefed on the mission. Asuka almost reveals the identity of the fourth children, the pilot on board the Eva, but is attacked and disabled by Unit 3. The Angel then launches onto the back of Unit 0 and begins infecting its left arm, forcing them to sever the connection. Unit 0 is disabled, and the Angel begins moving towards Unit 1. Shinji, upon seeing that the Angel overtook the Eva, refuses to attack, even while being strangled to death, due to the fact that there was another pilot aboard Unit 3. Ikari then orders the dummy plug installed in Unit 1, despite the system being riddled with errors. Unit 1 grabs the Angel by its neck, overtaking it, and begins a brutal execution of Unit 3, ripping apart each limb and crushing the escape pod containing the pilot, while Shinji is forced to watch. After the incident is over, it's revealed that the fourth children was alive, but in critical condition. Before Misato can tell Shinji, he sees Toji's body being pulled from the wreckage of the pod, and he reaches a mental breaking point. Episode 19 picks up with Shinji traumatized by Toji's injuries. Threatening to destroy Tokyo 3, Shinji is subdued on Commander Ikari's orders. Toji briefly wakes up in the hospital, dreaming of Shinji and Rei arguing nearby. Hikari visits Toji, who asks her to inform his sister of his condition. Meanwhile, Shinji confronts Commander Ikari, resigning from NERV and vowing never to pilot an Eva again. Misato hints Shinji can return anytime, leaving him at the train station just as the emergency alarm sounds. An angel is approaching Tokyo 3. As Unit 1 rejects Rei and the dummy system, Unit 2, piloted by Asuka, battles the angel but suffers severe damage. Rei in Unit 0 sacrifices herself with a mine to buy time. Shinji, urged by Kaji, returns to pilot Unit 1 against the Angel attacking NERV headquarters. After a fierce battle, Unit 1 overpowers and consumes the Angel. Kaji reflects on Unit 1's evolution and alludes to Seal's plans, marking a very pivotal moment in the series. Commander Ikari declares Unit 1's awakening as the beginning of the end. Seal questions his leadership, noting that the powerful S2 engines, the source of the Angel's unlimited energy, were not intended for the original Evangelions. Meanwhile, NERV assesses the severe damage from the last battle, including Unit 1's sync rate with Shinji reaching 400%, causing him to be absorbed into the LCL fluid, mirroring his mother's fate years prior. 2 days later, Rei awakens in the hospital while Asuka, humiliated by her failure, lashes out at Shinji. On the third day, Ritsuko proposes a risky salvage operation to reconstruct Shinji's body and reintegrate his soul, as he now exists in a formless primordial state. Lost in his subconscious, Shinji confronts his fears and identity. By day 30, the operation begins but fails as Shinji's LCL disperses, implying his death. Within his mind, he is drawn back to existence when Misato, overcome with emotion, clings to his plug suit. His body suddenly reappears near her. After his return, Misato spends the night with Kaji, seeking both comfort and answers about NERV. On August 15, 2000, the second impact occurs when a contact experiment fuses DNA with Adam, triggering an explosion that tilts Earth's axis and generates an anti-AT field, erasing all life in Antarctica. Scientists manage to revert Adam to an embryo, but the damage is done. Misato Katsuragi, saved by her father, is the sole survivor. In the present, Kaji leaves a farewell voicemail for Misato, hinting at his impending execution. Misato is interrogated after Kaji kidnaps Fuyutsuki and delivers him to Seal to prevent Gendo Ikari from controlling Unit 1. Seal's reference to Fuyutsuki as Professor sparks a flashback to NERV's origins. After the second impact, Fuyutsuki investigates Gendo's role and discovers Seal's influence. Gendo reveals an underground facility, Eva Unit 0, and introduces Fuyutsuki to Yui Ikari and Naoko Akagi. In 2003, Yui willingly participates in an experiment and was absorbed into Unit 1. Gendo, now obsessed with reuniting with her, shifts his focus to human instrumentality. By 2005, Tokyo 3 was under construction. In 2010, Rei was created, and the Magi system was completed. Young Rei insults Naoko Akagi, repeating Gendo's words. Enraged, Naoko kills her, then ends her own life. Episode 22, Staying Human, delves into Asuka's deteriorating mental state. She resents Misato, believing her to be insincere, and recalls her traumatic past. Asuka's bitterness grows when she sees Shinji and Rei interacting, and a call from her stepmother only deepens her isolation. Her declining mental state is reflected in her weakening synchronization with Unit 2. In an elevator ride, Rei advises Asuka to open her heart to the Eva. Asuka lashes out, calling both Rei and the Evas mere dolls, before accusing Rei of being willing to die for Commander Ikari, something Rei coldly confirms. When an angel appears in orbit, Asuka disobeys orders and launches into Unit 2. The angel attacks with an AT field that probes her mind, forcing her to relive painful memories of her mother and deep-seated fears. Feeling violated, she refuses to retreat, insisting that she'd rather die. Shinji begs to intervene, but Ikari denies his request, instead ordering Rei to retrieve the lance. Misato realizes the second impact wasn't caused by Adam, as using the lance should have triggered a third impact. Seal's plan for the lance is quietly debated, while Ikari reveals his intent to subvert their instrumentality project. Rei successfully throws the lance, destroying the angel but leaving it stranded in lunar orbit, disrupting Seal's plans. Asuka, shattered by the psychic assault, mutters about feeling dirty and is disgusted at being saved by Rei. The battle leaves her psychologically broken. Asuka is traumatized and hides at Hikari's house and refuses to go to school. Seal questions Gendo about his loyalty and unauthorized use of the lance before recalling him to HQ when an angel attacks. Unit 0 is deployed but is quickly fused with the angel. Asuka's sync rate is too low to help. Rei, mentally invaded, struggles with her fractured identity. Gendo authorizes Unit 1's launch, but the angel, now in Rei's form, attacks. Realizing her desire to be close to Shinji, Rei forces the angel into Unit 0 and self-destructs, killing herself and destroying the 16th angel. Seal, aware only one angel remains, moves to replace Gendo. Ritsuko recovers Rei 2's body and introduces Rei 3. Shinji visits her in the hospital where she has no memory of the battle and eerily remarks, "It's probably because I'm the third one." At home, she finds herself crying, sensing a vague emotional memory from her past selves. Misato forces Ritsuko to reveal NERV's secrets, bringing Shinji along. Ritsuko shows them an Evangelion graveyard and a vat of soulless Rei clones, spares for the real Rei who carries Lilith's soul. She coldly disintegrates them all, dismissing them as mere property. Asuka disappears for a week before NERV finds her waiting to die in an abandoned building. Gendo confronts Ritsuko about the dummy system, but she bitterly claims that she destroyed Rei instead, lamenting that neither she nor her mother could match Yui. Shinji, lost in grief over Asuka, Rei, and Misato, meets Kaworu, the fifth children. Unlike Shinji, everyone senses something unnatural about him. Misato investigates and finds his records erased, his birth date matching the second impact. In tests, he perfectly syncs with Unit 2. That night, Shinji, avoiding home, bathes with Kaworu and later follows him to his apartment, confiding in him. Seal moves against Gendo, who, before Unit 1, promises Yui their reunion is near. They reveal that angels are Adam's true heirs, meant to reclaim Earth, but humanity took the planet when Lilith arrived. Kaworu carries Adam's soul, while its body rests in Gendo's hand. Misato secretly follows Kaworu, who appears to talk to himself. Pressing Ritsuko for answers, she receives only a cryptic response: the final messenger. Kaworu activates Unit 2 remotely and descends into Central Dogma, forcing Shinji to pursue him. At the terminal, he discovers the being within isn't Adam, but Lilith. Accepting humanity's right to exist, he lets Unit 1 capture him. In the silence, he asks Shinji to kill him. A long pause, then a sickening crunch. It's beautiful. It's horrifying. It's inevitable. Racked with guilt, Shinji believes he should have died instead. Misato tries to console him, but nothing helps. In the following 2 episodes, we begin to delve into the inner workings of the mind that are later revealed to be the result of the instrumentality of humanity. This episode mostly evaluates the hearts of Shinji Ikari and those in relation to him. He cannot forgive himself for killing Kaworu. He's afraid of being rejected by others, by his father for being himself. He begs anyone to tell him what to do and examines his own motives. This episode is incredibly abstract and psychedelic. We then get a glimpse of Asuka hiding within Unit 2, and we examine the case of Rei Ayanami, the object referred to as Rei Ayanami. We see that she's been avoiding forming a sense of self because she's afraid of what she might find and that she knows she's been built to fulfill a purpose. However unclear that purpose may be to her at this point. We see Commander Ikari comes to collect Rei, and instrumentality is explained to us as the unification of all hearts into one perfect being, free from boundaries with others. During this explanation, we get brief glimpses at the bloodied corpses of our main characters from NERV. We move to examine Misato's character, her relationship with Kaji, and his resemblance to her father. She harbors deep abandonment issues and can't stand to live with herself on the inside. She feels as if she's playing a role the entire time. We jump to the case of Asuka. Her stepmother finds her off-putting and overly mature for her age after the death of her mother as a child. We see her birth mother speaking to the doll she thought was Asuka, asking it to die with her. She hates other people, but can't stand to be alone. She's terrified of living for others, but she hates living for herself. It's revealed that this is the Human Instrumentality Project, where all beings are united as one, and that Shinji has created a world devoid of life and other people, a closed-off world to protect his fragile heart. In the final episode, titled Take Care of Yourself, we continue the instrumentality of Shinji Ikari. They speak about the deficit in humanity, where instrumentality chooses to fill in each other's gaps by unifying all consciousness into one. We all have fears and doubts that, without the wall of others, wouldn't otherwise exist. We make assumptions of our worth and standing with others that are often incorrectly negative, even if they make passing comments when we often just hate ourselves and project it onto others. The sorrow of all man is what drives the need for instrumentality. The need for acceptance is ingrained so deeply within ourselves. It's a psychedelic episode mixing different art styles, types of animation, and real-life footage to create an image of the inner consciousness and thought that just isn't comparable to anything I've ever seen. Shinji explores the importance of boundaries in his perception of reality. He realizes that other people make up parts of his heart, and therefore himself. We suddenly get treated to an alternate reality scene where we get to see a positive world for our characters. Asuka and Shinji are childhood friends. Yui and Ikari are loving parents, and Rei is a new transfer student with a bold personality. Misato teaches his class, and all of his friends are there, alive and well. We're greeted with the congratulations scene that has been memed to death at this point, and it's revealed that that's one of the possibilities that could have been, but never came. It's almost heartbreaking in a way. While that marks the end of the series, there's still 2 movies that we have to go over. The first one, Evangelion Death, True aka Death and Rebirth, serves as a recap for the show. The project was initially supposed to be just one film, with Death being the series recap and Rebirth being what became the beginning of the movie The End of Evangelion. The movie recaps the series as well as adding a new segment with the 4 pilots, Shinji, Asuka, Rei, and Kaworu, playing Paco Bell's canon, with each arrival of a player bringing a different segment of the story. It can be refreshing to watch this after going through the initial series because a lot of the crucial information about the plot of Evangelion is placed in the later half of the show, which, according to some interviews conducted with the team behind the show, is likely intentional. The second movie I want to talk about is arguably the most important movie of the bunch, and that is The End of Evangelion. Now, the original show ended with a more thematic, introspective sense. However, End of Evangelion is more tangible. So in a way, this acts as a less ambiguous ending to the entire series, meaning if you want to find out who lives, who dies, how does the world change as a result of this series, then you're gonna kind of get your answers here. The End of Evangelion begins with Seal's assault on NERV to seize control and trigger the third impact. They first attempt a cyber attack, but when Ritsuko foils it, they authorize a full-scale invasion. NERV personnel are slaughtered as Misato scrambles to protect the pilots. Asuka is placed in Unit 2 and submerged in a lake, while Shinji, paralyzed by despair, is left hiding. Gendo searches for Rei, intending to use her to initiate his own version of instrumentality. Misato reaches Shinji, killing his executioners and dragging him towards Unit 1, urging him to live. She explains that humanity is the 18th angel and must choose its fate. As she is fatally shot, she kisses Shinji goodbye and sends him off. Meanwhile, Asuka, connecting with her mother's soul inside Unit 2, finds her will to live and annihilates NERV's attackers. However, Seal deploys the mass production Evas, which overpower and brutally kill her. Shinji, witnessing Asuka's remains, finally activates Unit 1, but Seal takes control, crucifying it in the sky to use as a vessel for instrumentality. Gendo reaches Rei and tries to merge with her using Adam's embryo, but she rejects it, fusing with Lilith instead. A colossal Rei emerges, initiating third impact. Seal's plan to unite all souls begins as humanity dissolves into LCL. Inside instrumentality, Shinji confronts his fears, relationships, and self-worth. A vision of Asuka rejects him, triggering his realization that life, pain, and individuality matter. Choosing to reject instrumentality, he collapses Lilith, returning human souls to Earth. Unit 1 ascends into space as a monument to humanity's will to exist. Shinji awakens on the desolate shore of the LCLC, finding Asuka beside him. In a final disturbing moment, he strangles her, seemingly testing if she's real. Instead of resisting, she touches his face, mirroring his mother, causing him to break down in tears. After a long silence, she utters the last words of the film. Disgusting. That's really heavy, so, yeah, I don't know. Watch this.
Hey, little buddy, how are you doing?
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Whoa. Pim, can I talk to you for a second? Look, Pim, I know it's our job to help this guy and everything, but I think this guy's a lost cause. He's obviously made up his mind. Why don't we just cut our losses and get out of here?
Episode 25 and 26 of the TV series quickly became incredibly controversial due to the introspective and psychedelic nature of their themes. A lot of fans wanted to know what exactly took place in the following days, and whether or not the third impact occurred. The studio included an interview with Kazuya Tsuromaki in the Red Cross book, the deputy director working on Neon Genesis Evangelion, in which Tsuromaki details the intensive stress and scheduling issues the entire studio was working with in the final days of production with the TV show. But he showed the same satisfaction with the original ending as Anno has. He also details the decision to move more towards the introspective themes from episode 16 and onward. He notes that the shift towards the internal was planned to happen around episodes 10 to 12, but they couldn't get the story to work out until that point, and that the original intention was to finish the TV series as it was. In the Platinum Collection booklet, the two endings topic is covered. They compare two endings as the TV ending being the telling of the theme rather than the story, and the End of Evangelion being the plotline ending that the fans were desperately craving. I would argue that with the release of The End of Evangelion, the inclusion of the TV series ending is rather insightful, and the idea of telling the theme of the story was a really interesting route to take creatively. Obviously, this series garnered a lot of attention for its portrayal of thought and consciousness, as nothing like it had ever been seen, and I'd almost go as far as to say it really hasn't been replicated since either. The implementation of different types of film and animation and the legwork behind this whole process is something that you'd be hard-pressed to replicate, and the fact that they often approach the series one episode at a time rather than planning out the entire thing is really what gives the project an entirely different feeling, even though that evidently resulted in their horrible scheduling. The amount of times Hideki Anno had been asked questions regarding the ending of Evangelion and the choices for two endings has gathered a lot of frustrations from him, as he intended for the story to end in a kind of open-ended, ambiguous style, allowing for interpretation to be gleaned from the viewer, which we'll talk a bit more in depth about as we look at Anno's intentions shortly. There was also some controversy mentioned earlier with Netflix's acquisition of the show, and changes that were implemented by them. By far, the biggest and most spoken of changes is the notable absence of Frank Sinatra's Fly Me to the Moon as the outro of each episode, as well as during the scene in which Misato receives Kaji's final voicemail. Or was it? While the Netflix Japan version apparently retained the original outros, the licensing fees elsewhere were allegedly too costly for Netflix to pay for, so they instead changed the outro to a variation of the introduction theme. Many fans comment that the tone of the scene involving Misato completely changed without the song, and were generally unhappy with the resulting effect. They also came under fire for recasting the entire dub, which isn't inherently a bad thing to do, but it felt like a betrayal of the original cast members. It could be jarring to be met with an entirely new voice cast for a show that you're already well acquainted with, so I can definitely understand how some fans would be upset. However, it's kind of one of those things where it's more of a minor complaint compared to some of the other grievances that were voiced. A lot of fans voiced their irritations at the translations put forth by Netflix, arguing that certain meaning was lost from the show with these changes, specifically the scene involving a conversation between Shinji and Kaworu. In the new version, Kaworu says the lines, "You're worthy of my grace," and "It means I like you." In the original version, these statements were, "You're worthy of love," and "It means I love you." Some have been quick to point out that these changes are in line with Netflix's decision to move closer to the direct translation of the language, noting that there's ambiguity around the usage of the word love in that scene, and it's changed to be more of a contextual reference rather than an in-your-face confession. Many also note the lack of cursing due to the direct translation of Japanese into English, which changes the context of certain lines drastically. When Shinji mutters, "I'm the lowest of the lows," in the beginning of the End of Evangelion, the original line is a very remorseful, I'm so fucked up. Another example of a pretty consequential line being lost in translation is a reference to NERV's slogan, "God's in his heaven, all is right with the world." As the last SEAL member begins to lose his AT field, he originally says, "All is right with the world," but in the newer Netflix dub, he says, "All is very good," which I actually agree is not a good change for them to have made because the reference was entirely lost on me with that translation. It would have made more sense contextually to have kept the line the same. NERV's motto is a reference to a poem by Robert Browning, and the loss of this reference just makes it an odd translation. With some of the major controversy out of the way, let's look deeper into the themes of Evangelion. It would be a gross misrepresentation of the series to say that there isn't any religious ties. There's symbolism littered everywhere. The creators behind the series have stated that they chose to use traditional Western religious iconography because they wanted to give themselves an interesting visual edge, and that they likely would not have gone in that direction had they known Evangelion was going to become an international hit. They pull from Judeo-Christian symbolism, as well as Kabbalism, which is a form of esoteric Jewish mysticism, and Gnosticism, a form of thought centered around very early Christian and Jewish beliefs on interpersonal spirituality. It's hard to say whether or not Evangelion would have had the same cult following if it had neglected to use the symbolism and plot devices it had, but what we can definitely conclude is that those behind the show at least put some amount of research into the themes and icons used, even if they weren't often bent to fit the narrative. It would also be a misrepresentation to say that Neon Genesis Evangelion is about religion. If anything, the religious aspects allude to the pride of men, assuming themselves to be capable of ascending to godhood to begin with, while serving as a narrative device to relay the intended message behind certain decisions. Obviously, we're presented with a slew of crosses throughout the series, but the most important being the crucifixion of Unit 1 in episode 26 of the End of Evangelion, where it's revealed by Seal that they intend to use Shinji as their sacrificial lamb to begin the third impact after the lance is returned from lunar orbit. The lance itself is also a reference to the biblical lance that pierced the side of Jesus Christ while he was being crucified. During this scene, we're presented with a seal being formed by the MP Evas, which is the symbol for the Tree of Life in Kabbalism. A symbol representing the Tree of Life can also be seen in the introduction to each episode, as well as a representation of the third angel that's loosely based on old typography of angels from the Bible. Shinji in Unit 1 as the representation of the Fruit of Knowledge, and Lilith as the representation of the Fruit of Life merge, transforming Unit 1 into the Tree of Life and beginning the third impact. The Fruit of Knowledge is also known as the Forbidden Fruit in the Bible, as it's the fruit that gets Adam and Eve cast out of the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis. Adam is an obvious reference, but Lilith herself being present is a nod to the Jewish telling of Genesis, in which Adam's first wife was Lilith, and she was made of the earth as well, but she refused to be subjected to Adam's wishes and was cast into hell, making her the first demon. Eve was then born of Adam as his second wife in a similar fashion to how Evangelions, or Evas, were made in the image of Adam, the first angel. The Magi system, which controls a majority of the decisions for the operations of NERV, as well as Tokyo 3, is named after the three wise men, the Magi. They're the ones that came to visit Jesus after foretelling his birth. Their names are the same names of each individual Magi system, representing the personalities of Naoko Akagi, which may be a nod to historical discussions that each of the three wise men represented a different country when bringing gifts to Jesus. The Dead Sea Scrolls is another one of the bigger topics throughout the series, as it's revealed that they predicted the angels as well as the second and third impact. The Dead Sea Scrolls are a real set of religious texts that were accidentally discovered in 1947 and are a set of manuscripts that pertain to ancient Judeo-Christian practices, as well as lost books of the Bible and various other pieces of important religious history. While the real Dead Sea Scrolls obviously don't contain anything about space angels, it does serve as a very clever narrative device, and is reinvented to serve a relatively historical accurate purpose. Again, implying that at least the bare minimum amount of thought had been put into these applications of religion across the series. Aside from the references that are directly in your face, such as the crosses, there's constant tongue-in-cheek references to biblical stories, one such being Commander Ikari and Commander Fuyutsuki discussing the LCLC, in which Ikari sees the area as a paradise, a world free from the sins of man. Fuyutsuki sees the place as hell on earth, and a constant reminder of the sins of man. Another would be Seal's constant reference to man's tendency to play God with the lives of other men. The choice to derive some of the themes from Western religion was a very bold one to make, and it likely did help push this anime over the top in terms of narrative and visual effects, but the team did put in some of the legwork to research these symbols and apply them somewhat accurately, while still being able to bend their meaning or contents to fit the narrative the show was actually trying to portray. Religion can be an incredibly important part to our identities, and being able to explore the aspects of identity with religious connotations is just another means that Evangelion employed to rightfully secure its place in our culture. Neon Genesis Evangelion is about identity. It's about the concept of the inner self and the fear of the other. This show spends a large amount of its time displaying the complex interactions between characters, as well as building their psychological profile before the direct shift to the internal world of episode 16 and forward. The show gathered a massive fan base due to its introspective nature, making it an international sensation which far surpassed the intended audience set up by Hideki Anno when he began designing Evangelion. The portrayal of thought and consciousness completely captivated me, as I had literally never seen anything come so close to thought before, let alone a mecha show of all things. I wasn't the only one enraptured by the portrayal of themes in this show. It's won multiple awards and even caught the attention of multiple college researchers to write papers discussing the cultural and psychological themes surrounding Neon Genesis Evangelion. Now, I'm not doing a college dissertation level analysis of the themes of identity in the show right now, but we are going to examine the mental states and different aspects of each of our characters. Shinji Ikari is awkward with other people. He's often compared to his father in this regard because they both have no idea how to understand and relate to other people. He is someone with a fragile heart who is clumsy with other people. Part of this isn't particularly Shinji's fault, with the loss of his mother at a very young age, and his father deciding that he'd be better off not living with or being near Shinji for most of his life, which is revealed in the end of Evangelion. Being passed around by his teachers and living alone, he doesn't really gain the opportunity to connect with anyone in a real way until he joins NERV, and is forced to be around others. It's evident from the beginning of the show that his relationship with his father is tumultuous. He clearly wants to please his father, and this relationship only gets more complicated as time passes. And Shinji is able to see where his father's priorities lie. It's also worth exploring with all of our pilots that they are effectively middle school students. Being 14 is a very difficult thing. It's a hard time in your life, filled with drastic changes under normal circumstances. This is a time in our development where we begin to see our personalities and understand who we are fundamentally as people. Coupling this with having to risk your life constantly to save the world is not something that would be easy on your mental facilities. We almost see Shinji get painted as kind of wimpy or whiny when he digs his heels in and refuses to complete orders, but he is a child, and he has a very limited say about what happens to him physically, as well as how he has to behave in order to continue his work with NERV. I'll admit that on my first watch through of the show, I was kind of frustrated with how we see him react to certain situations and his level of maturity. But upon further reflection and getting into the details of the story, he's probably one of the few characters that has a normal reaction to the situations and stress everyone at NERV is constantly under. I feel like this realization was also very much facilitated by the show's shift to the introspective later on in the series, but we begin to see it early on as others comment on Shinji's history. There is a lot of focus by Shinji placed on not running away. It's one of the first things we get to see about his internal life in the first episode, when Rei falls off the gurney and onto the floor. The paperwork that was sent by his father is shredded and retaped when handing it to Misato. He repeats the line constantly throughout the series. In the interview with Tsurumaki in the Red Cross book, We find out that a lot of the decisions on Shinji's personality were modeled after Hideki Anno. Quote, "To tell the truth, I'm not sure. But at the very least, I tried to work on the project from that viewpoint. That's why in the scenario planning sessions, I was always saying something like, isn't that a little too hero-like for Shinji to say? Hideki Anno isn't that much of a hero." This viewpoint seems to be echoed quite often, as Anno's struggle with depression was a center point for the idea of Evangelion. The struggle of mental health is something we see reflect differently in all of our various characters. For Shinji, he struggles with his fears of other people that contextually make a great deal of sense for someone who, by all accounts, has been abandoned by both his parents at such a young age. Throughout the series, we get to watch Shinji's inner turmoil as he begins to develop relationships with others and realizes that, while he wishes to be close with other people, the fear in his heart of others is what pushes him to continue to run away. He finds himself paralyzed, unable to make decisions because he has a deep-rooted need to please others, in hopes of them not abandoning him, which causes a lot of strife for him later down the road. He has an incredibly hard time understanding his desire to be close with others and how he views his relationship with others, which we get to really begin to understand in episode 16, as he is forced to examine who he is within himself when he loses his ego boundary after the fight in Unit 1. This is also one of the first examples of Shinji truly choosing other people, as when he's reminded of Misato as he's clutching his plug suit, he reappears on the ground. We know from the End of Evangelion, a person who wishes to return to form from LCL fluid simply has to remember themselves and wish for their return, so it seems that, for however brief of a time, Shinji's need for others outweighed his need to hide from others. He's slowly becoming aware of his maternal feelings towards Rei. Their relationship becomes closer as he continues to go out of his way to help her, ripping her from the escape pod after she bids him farewell before a fight in episode 6, and noting she looked like a mother when wringing out a wet towel after class one day. Eventually, it's revealed to him that Rei is a clone of Yui Ikari, and was embedded with the soul of Lilith as well as the basis of the dummy plug system, and the soul of his mother was absorbed into Unit 1, which is why the Evangelion repeatedly moves to protect him. He understands that when Rei, too, sacrificed herself in the previous battle after realizing her maternal feelings towards Shinji, she was replaced with the third iteration of Rei. He struggles with these feelings, as he never really knew his mother nor remembered her face, though he was present on the day she was absorbed into Unit 1. He also struggles with the feelings he harbors towards his father and his father's relationship with Rei. While Gendo and Rei's relationship is superficial when you look at it, it's hard to watch someone else be the object of a parent's affection that you so desperately crave. His later breakdowns throughout the series tend to be somewhat deserved, even if they aren't the most dignified. For example, after being forced to witness the brutal takedown of Unit 3 as well as mangling his friend and classmate Toji in episode 19, he threatens to destroy half of Tokyo 3 with the remaining power in his Evangelion as retribution. While he's shamed for making immature threats and generally being childish, the amount of extensive mental trauma he's just been put through completely explains the outburst and further confirms his fear of the others, as this is a massive betrayal he suffered at the hands of his father yet again. When he decides to leave NERV, it's a decision that he makes for himself, to break free of his father's grasp on him. The reason he returns is to save his friends. We see his motives change from this point on. He again chooses others, but in this choice, he breaks free of the prison his father's opinion has kept him in. When Shinji meets Kaworu, he finds someone that he can finally connect with, because Kaworu isn't a human, and he doesn't understand the fear of the other. He feels he can open up to him, trailing him home, which makes the struggle to take Kaworu's life even harder when it's revealed that he's the final angel. Though he chooses to protect humanity, he agonizes over it. Unable to cope with this loss as a result of his actions, he becomes despondent, wishing for death. When we look at the scenes from episode 25 of the TV series, we explore the different aspects of Shinji's sorrows and discover that he's walled himself off from the rest of the world internally because he's afraid of being betrayed again. In episode 26, he explores the concept of space and self within that space. Having form means having different constraints than not having form, and thereby creates fears. In the End of Evangelion, Shinji explores his inner pain as well as his needs and desires. Eventually, he finds himself wishing for the company of others, understanding that with the boundary of the other comes the pain and anxiety of the constraints being placed on the self, and still, he chooses others and begins rejecting human instrumentality. In the case of Shinji Ikari, we see someone who is finally released from the burdens his parents placed on his soul, and someone who has accepted the fear of other people if it means the ability to experience their presence in his continued existence. To run away is akin to never having existed at all. Misato starts the show as Special Agent, but is then promoted to Major at NERV. We quickly find out that she joined NERV after the Katsuragi expedition in Antarctica, which was headed by her father. This resulted in the second impact, leaving her as the only survivor. She feels a need to defeat the angels to free herself of the debt she owes her father for saving her life, whom she had conflicting feelings about to begin with. He was often unavailable to her growing up, invested in his work and treating her mother rather poorly. She yearned for his attention, but hated herself for wanting it, as she vowed to never be like her mother. She finds comfort in the arms of Ryoji, because he reminds her of her father in a number of ways, which is why their relationship was incredibly tumultuous, and the reason she cut him off in the first place. Yet, in her final moments, she calls to him, still seeking his comfort. After the second impact occurred and she was rescued, Misato spent a period of time being mute as the trauma began to settle in. As time progressed, she learned how to put up appearances, but remarks later in the show that she's tired of pretending to be clean and pretty all the time. Early in the show, Ritsuko notes that she's ever the optimist. Even though deep within herself, she's incredibly sad and lonely, we also know that she constantly feels as if she's letting Shinji down as his mentor, particularly in the times in which he decided to leave her, dragging up the abandonment issues from her father and damaging the hope she places in him. She later implies that her relationship with Shinji is both maternal in the sense that she mentors him, and perhaps sexual, though she never actually moves further than giving him a kiss in the show. Thank God. Asuka is a very complex person with very complex traumas that start from a young age. She definitely wins the award for having the worst parents in the series, as her mother, a previous NERV developer for Unit 2, suffered severe psychological damages after undergoing testing with Unit 2, where part of her soul was absorbed into the Evangelion and causing what was left of her to slowly lose her mind. She believed that the real Asuka was a doll that she carried around and would ask the doll to die with her while Asuka watched. Eventually, on the day she was told she would be a pilot for Unit 2, she finds her mother hanging from the ceiling. She notes that she hated the smile that was on her face. Later on, in the End of Evangelion, she recognizes her mother's soul within Unit 2 protecting her and finds the will to fight, and evidently die with her mother. Asuka's father was little comfort to her, quickly remarrying a woman who notes that she finds Asuka unsettlingly mature for her age and isn't comfortable around her. She feels the need to grow up quickly, trying to make sexual advances on the men around her, which is a tactic she may have learned from Misato when she was her handler in Germany. Asuka doesn't enjoy Misato's company because she sees right through her outwardly happy appearance and notes that she's faking all the time. She harbors an intense infatuation towards Ryoji. After him being her handler in the United States, she often tries to make advances on the typically promiscuous man, but he rejects her every time, noting that she should wait to grow up. It's possible that Kaji, being one of, if not the first somewhat supportive male role model in her life, has something to do with her infatuation of. It's possible that Kaji, being one of, if not the first somewhat supportive male role model in her life, has something to do with her infatuation with him, which is supported further by her calling out to him after the events of episode 22, the angel attack that invaded her mind. Her relationship with Shinji is intense and somewhat bipolar, with her unable to cope with her conflicting feelings towards him. This is explored more in the manga release of Neon Genesis Evangelion, but we get glimpses of it throughout the show. Asuka sulks to Hikari about Shinji and Rei's relationship, perceiving him to be romantically interested in her and becoming intensely jealous of Rei, to the point of repulsion in episode 22 when her life is saved by Rei. She remarks she would have rather died than be saved by her. Asuka's disdain for Rei is partially fueled by her competitive nature in general, as she's often threatened with being replaced by Rei in operations, and a conversation the two have where Rei tells Asuka to lower her inner walls to the Evangelion. Asuka calls the Evas dolls, unwilling to believe they have a heart or soul, and reveals her disgust for Rei, calling her a doll as well, saying, quote, "I bet you'd die if Commander Ikari ordered you to." Wouldn't you? To which she's even more outraged to get a firm, I would. She thinks Rei is mindless, incapable of thinking for herself, and feels herself to be incredibly flawed and inferior in comparison, which she can't begin to cope with. Asuka is often disgusted by Shinji's cowardice, refusing to take the lead whatsoever in their relationship, and expresses this frustration over and over again. Particularly, we see some of this in the End of Evangelion during Instrumentality, while Shinji explores his life. There's a relatively brutal scene where the two fight about what Asuka wants. Shinji says she's the only one for him and begs her to tell him what to do. They fight further, culminating with him ending up on the floor asking her not to leave him, abandon him, not to kill him. She pauses for a long minute and coldly replies, no. He strangles her then, and once more at the end of the movie, when they lie on the LCL beach together, she doesn't fight him either time. The latter of which she reaches her hand up to his face as if to comfort him before he begins to sob over her. She notes her disgust at his sobbing before the movie ends, though it's unclear if it's aimed at his sobbing or the knowledge of what she experienced during Instrumentality. Their relationship is clearly incredibly strained, as neither of them have an example of a functioning relationship to base the romantic involvement after, as well as their alienation from other forms of supportive relationships in their formative years. In the alternate reality scene, they still have this kind of aloof relationship, but it's toned down to a degree that's healthy for people of their age. It's a glimpse at what they would have looked like if their worlds hadn't collapsed early on. And I think this is a really good spot to get a look at who they truly would be without the burdens of existence on their shoulders. Rei is a clone of Yui Ikari that's been imbued with the soul of Lilith. There were 3 iterations of Rei over the course of the TV series and the End of Evangelion, with the first being murdered by Naoko as a young girl after repeating Commander Ikari's insult to her. Rei's name actually comes from when Yui was pregnant with Shinji. It was his female name. She's unaware that she harbors the soul of Lilith within her, as we see in episode 24, when Kaworu and Rei's interaction. As we see in episode 24 during Kaworu and Rei's interaction. Rei's loyalty starts the series in the hands of Gendo Ikari, as she knows she was designed by him for a specific purpose, and he's gone through great lengths to ensure her safety, even ripping off the door of a burning hot escape pod to rescue her. Ikari's fondness for her is clearly stemmed from his fondness for his wife, which she inevitably rejects in the end for Shinji, as his intentions toward her are pure, and she acknowledges her desire to protect Shinji. She moves twice to protect him in this regard. Once when she self-destructs Unit 0 to defeat the Angel in episode 23, and once again when she rejects Ikari's attempts to use her for his version of Instrumentality and moves to investigate Shinji's scream. In Rei's internal scene, we get to see her refer to herself as the object called Rei, as she generally sees herself as a means to an end. We find out she runs from forming a personality, as she knows she was designed for a purpose, so she avoids getting close to others and herself in an attempt to make sense of her life. She knows there have been multiple iterations of her and struggles to connect the 3 consciousnesses in her life. She notes in both versions of the final episodes that she hadn't been afraid to die until then. As the day approaches, she finds herself uneasy with the thought. Perhaps it's because she allowed herself to grow closer to Shinji and form an honest relationship with someone for the first time since her creation. Given that her soul is that of Lilith, this may be why she struggles to comprehend her desires and the hearts of others as often as she does, and also may be the reason her relationship with Shinji is incredibly impactful to her. Gendo Ikari has always been awkward with others. The only one he ever seemed to charm was Yui Ikari, much to the dismay of one of her professors and his future deputy commander, Kozo Fuyusuki. It's also heavily implied that Fuyusuki harbors a kind of love for Yui Ikari, which may have been what united the 2 men to begin working together. Gendo's love for Yui is real, though many assumed it to be superficial based on assumptions made of his often cold personality. After suffering the loss of his wife during the testing of Unit 1, his state of mind began to change completely, which was noted by Fuyutsuki. His motives changed to simply being reunited with Yui by any means necessary, and, in turn, pushes his son away. It's later revealed that he pushed Shinji away in an effort to protect him, thinking that being close with Shinji would only end up in the boy getting hurt and voices his doubts that he would ever be able to be a good father. He regrets pushing his son away from him, and in the spare moments that we get to see Gendo and Shinji interact, it seems to be riddled with confusion and tension. Shinji hates his father. Gendo recognizes this and hates himself in turn. He notes at the beginning of the show that he only saw Shinji as a means to an end when he summoned him to Pilot Unit 1. But the small glimpses of praise we see may be the only connection Gendo is truly capable of having with Shinji after suffering the loss of Yui. It's also worth noting that seeing individuals as a means to an end is nothing new for Gendo. His relationships with Naoko and Ritsuko show this in full detail, as he was the subject of both of their affection and used them to fulfill his intentions and desires. In his final moments, he realizes that he's been acting counter to what Yui would have wanted, and is ready to atone for the sins he committed against his son, as well as the rest of humanity. Hideki Anno is a highly praised Japanese animator, filmmaker, and director. He's stated in past interviews that he always had a fascination with television, in particular the anime and tokusatsu genres. Tokusatsu is the Japanese term for films that rely heavily on special effects. He would later go on to work on a couple of these movies, like Shin Godzilla, which was what initially brought us here in the first place. Early on in his life, he began studying filmmaking and animation, honing his skills before he eventually went to college for animation before dropping out. During this time, he stumbled upon an advertisement desperately looking for animators at the then studio of Miyazaki. Miyazaki was impressed with Anno's technical ability, despite dropping out of college, and he had him complete the more difficult sections of animating for Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. When interviewed, Miyazaki notes that when he first met Hideki Anno, it was like meeting an alien from a different planet. He couldn't understand the way that Anno functioned, often moving like a creature in his eyes. They remain good friends to this day, though they don't work together on projects often, as Miyazaki notes in an interview that they're both very stubborn, which results in them fighting. Still, they do work together when Miyazaki needs someone who can give his project the extra work, and he holds a lot of respect for the dedication and genuine work that Anno produces. In terms of Anno's history with film and animation, it's really interesting to look at Neon Genesis Evangelion through the lens of a filmmaker rather than an animator, which I think we really do get to see throughout the series. A lot of the shots that we are greeted with, mainly those with lasting impact like the awakening and liberation of Unit 1 in Episode 19, interactions between Kaworu and Shinji in his final moments during Episode 24, to name a few, and the conversation regarding dreams with Shinji and Yui in the End of Evangelion, which employs the use of real-life footage, as well as animation in order to show the importance of the scene. Now, obviously, Anno was the director that was guiding behind these scenes, but the actual animator was Mitsuo Aiso, whose approach to animation is the second half of making Neon Genesis Evangelion what it was visually. The first time I watched the show, I was taken aback by the show's style. It very much felt like the type of shots that you would get in a real-life show, and it gave Neon Genesis Evangelion an extra sense of visual complexity, which the series would not have had otherwise. I won't delve too far into the animation style of Aiso, but his ability to portray and accurately manipulate the space he's animating in is part of what gives Evangelion its iconic look. It can be very difficult to take into account an object's weight and mass when it comes to animation, and the fact that we see multiple examples throughout the series of fluid animation that still accurately portrays these acts of strength is really interesting. Keep in mind, this show was released in the mid-90s. They didn't have all of the current digital animation tools, and most of this show was created via hand-painted cells, with some special effects work layered on top of it. While the creation of these digital tools has been wonderful for animators, making the animation field generally more accessible, we also lose the distinctive style of handmade animation. Anno himself places no value in his own work, despite the massive amounts of recognition and relatively good reception. He cannot seem to find any sort of pride being connected to the animation field, noting that the world of animation is relatively small and that he doesn't find any joy in telling strangers what he does for a living. Saying, quote, "In the animation world, I would go as far as to say I'm famous, but if I was to walk into a bar and sit at the counter, it's not a job I could easily strike up a conversation with the girl sitting next to me. It's embarrassing." End quote. A lot of the struggles we see within the characters, particularly Shinji, as was mentioned earlier, are the feelings Anno wrestles with himself. He has a very hard time seeing the value in himself and the life around him, and in a very real way, Neon Genesis Evangelion was a portrayal of these inner depths. He states repeatedly that his intended audience for Evangelion was people who were already into anime, but mainly the older fans, somewhere in the 30-year-old demographic. Because he wanted to give them a message about isolation and the critical inner self, his production team has noted in several interviews over the years that it seemed Anno was coming off of a type of depression at the beginning of Evangelion, and that he used the core theme of a previous show he was working on that never came to fruition, which was not running away from your problems. He also intended to make something open-ended that the viewers could kind of speculate about and draw their own conclusions, which is one of the reasons he's given for the release of the TV episodes 25 and 26. The release of these episodes were incredibly controversial at the time, and I mentioned earlier that Anno became very frustrated when repeatedly asked about episode 25 and 26, and I think this is because a lot of popular media still doesn't do the "this is the end, draw your own conclusions" trope anymore. It's typically set up for further plot that fans can speculate about. While I admire the choice to put the intention and direction of the series in the audience's hands like that, I'm just not sure people were ready to do the out-of-the-box thinking that this series requires of you when it comes to the philosophical ideation present throughout the show, which is often conflicting in nature, but that's life, and that's the point. Neon Genesis Evangelion is an epic series detailing both the end of humanity as we previously knew them, as well as the complicated inner workings of consciousness. This show changed the trajectory of Japanese animation, and the fact that it was so internationally loved and respected by fans, a catalyst for the current fascination with the genre today internationally, gaining notoriety and high praise from various critics. The show is both a product of love and the vessel for which fans project their love onto to this day, whether that be through art, cosplay, or of course, memes.
Shinji, crank that soldier boy!
Okay, Asuka.
Hideki Anno's desire to reach the hearts of the people that loved Japanese animation was beyond a complete success, winning the hearts of the general public. The show proves itself to be way more than just the sum of its parts, with underlying meaning hidden absolutely everywhere. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from the show on love, boundaries, and the fear of others, but one of the biggest things that we can learn from it is our own interactions with the themes of the story and how they personally impact us. And with all of that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick. You're watching Firewind Media. Consider becoming a member to support the channel. For just $1.99 a month, you'll receive member shoutouts and your name featured as an executive producer in all of our film projects. I want to thank these members right here. These are the members of the channel. Thank you so much. It means the absolute most. I also want to thank Josh for helping me on writing and researching this video. I could not have done it without him. So, sincerely, thank you so much for making all this happen, as well as all the editors that worked on this video. This is by far the biggest and most expensive video I've ever made on this channel. So I just wanted to say to everyone involved, thank you so much for making my dreams a reality. And to you, if you made it all the way through, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out. By the way, this hat, I only got it for tax purposes. I did not want to pay tax on this hat, so it's going to be a fun day at the tax office explaining to my tax lady the Evangelion Unit 1 hat, that's tax deductible. It's a business expense. I needed it for the video. I needed it. So this was a fun purchase.